Greetings, my fellow renegades. In this video, I will guide you step by step through a DIY process of improving your indoor air quality with dehumidification. First, I will talk about how humidity can impact indoor air quality and health, and then I'll help you figure out if you need to run a dehumidifier. And then I'll guide you through a process of setting up a high-quality dehumidifier yourself. This video contains pretty much everything a person who lives in a home needs to know about DIY dehumidification without all the fluff. And welcome to the Healthy Home Guide. This is a place where I share practical, budget-friendly tips for creating a safe and healthy home, whether the word home refers to your house or your body. Please go ahead and like this video and subscribe because it causes the YouTube algorithm to swing its all-powerful gaze to my channel. Let's begin. How does elevated indoor humidity impact health? Well, evidence from numerous epidemiological studies and analyses by the World Health Organization, the Institute of Medicine, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention showed indoor dampness or mold were consistently associated with increases in multiple diseases, including eczema, asthma, nasal allergies, bronchitis, and respiratory infections. But that's not all. Further emerging research suggests that mold can cause even more illnesses than the ones I mentioned. I'm not the only one who finds this research compelling, by the way. ASHRAE, an association that provides standards for HVAC system design and construction, has created metrics that separately serve as early warnings of potential future health-relevant dampness. I know that sentence was a lot. I'm basically saying that ASHRAE creates ways to measure whether a building might be damp enough to cause health issues. For this video, I'll focus on one of those metrics: a persistent indoor humidity above a dew point temperature of 60 degrees Fahrenheit for buildings that are being mechanically cooled. In other words, indoor dew point must be kept at 60 degrees Fahrenheit or below. There is a part 2 to that metric about keeping dew point below 45 degrees Fahrenheit in heating season, but that's more relevant to a future video I'll make about humidification. Anyway, here's how to conceptualize the meaning of dew point. Practically speaking, it tells you how much water vapor is in the air. The higher it is, the more water vapor. If air finds any surface with a temperature at or below dew point, water vapor from that air will condense into a liquid. At this point, you might be wondering, why are we using dew point as a threshold and not relative humidity, or RH, something we're all more familiar with? Basically, RH is misleading. I'll explain why by talking about psychrometrics. Psychrometrics is the science that involves the properties of moist air, which is a mixture of dry air and water vapor, and the processes in which the temperature and/or water vapor content of the mixture are changed. Here's an example to illustrate why RH is deceptive. Let's say the outdoor air is 32 degrees Fahrenheit and its RH is 100%. Sounds pretty humid, right? What happens when that air leaks into your home? Most people would think, well, since the RH of the outdoor air is 100%, you'd be bringing a lot of moisture into your house. And they'd actually be wrong. This is because when 32-degree air has an RH of 100%, it contains 22 grains per pound of water vapor, which is a relatively small amount of water vapor. So why does cold air contain less water vapor? In answering this, I actually have an opportunity to correct a mistake I made in a previous video explaining this concept. In my defense, though, virtually every source explains this concept wrong, including textbooks, weather people, science YouTube channels with millions of subscribers, etc. The misconception is that cold air has less of a capacity for holding moisture than warm air. That's not true. Here's the actual truth from an article entitled "Cold Air is Dry Air" from Dr. Allison Bale's brilliant Energy Vanguard blog. In simple terms, a warmer temperature implies a greater potential for water vapor. That's because it's easier for water to evaporate when there's more heat around. So the hotter it is, the more readily liquid water evaporates and becomes water vapor. Think of how a clothes dryer works. It heats up your clothes to remove moisture from them. So of course, the colder it is, the less readily water evaporates. That's why cold air is dry air. Now let's go back to the example. To recap, the outdoor air is 32 degrees Fahrenheit with an RH of 100% and 22 grains per pound of water vapor. Let's say the air inside your home is 70 degrees. If that outdoor air leaks into your home, then it warms up to 70 degrees, its RH would then be 20%. Sounds pretty dry, right? In the warmer 70-degree air, there's a greater potential for water vapor through evaporation, around 110 grains per pound of potential. So when air with 22 grains per pound leaks inside and warms up to 70 degrees, it becomes apparent that it contains relatively little water vapor. 22 grains per pound of vapor only occupies 20% of the water vapor potential of 70-degree air. So RH is deceptive because RH alone doesn't tell you how humid it is. You need to know the temperature as well. In contrast, dew point is far more useful because it alone can serve as an indicator of how humid a space is. For example, let's talk about two spaces with the same RH and different temperatures. Two spaces have an RH of 50%. One space is 85 degrees Fahrenheit and the other is 68 degrees. Even though RH in both spaces is 50%, the hotter space contains almost twice as much water vapor. The dew point of the hotter space is 64 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite humid, and the dew point of the cool space is 49 degrees, which is fairly dry. So dew point tells you how humid it is, RH does not. To explain how RH is misleading in real-world situations, I'll read a quote from ASHRAE's Damp Buildings, Human Health, and HVAC Design Guide. Using RH in the air as a metric of concern is highly misleading. Focusing on an RH limit leads to needless concern when the temperature of the air is cool, as in the case of supply air temperature during cooling operation. An RH focus also allows an unwarranted sense of safety when the air temperature is above normal, such as in a school during summer vacation when the indoor temperature may be quite high. So let's stop using RH as a measure of humidity and start using dew point instead. To transition to using dew point, you just have to become familiar with the scale. Here it is. 30 Fahrenheit is very dry, 40 is dry, 50 is comfortable, 60 is a bit humid, and 70 is oppressively humid. So going back to ASHRAE's threshold of 60, why 60 as a threshold? I'll answer that with an example. In a periodically cooled space, the air temperature has risen to 83 degrees Fahrenheit. The RH is 54%. That means that the dew point is 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Here's why that's especially problematic. The surface temperature of the ceiling near where the cooled air comes out is also 65 degrees Fahrenheit, the same as the dew point. Condensation therefore occurs on the ceiling, and in turn, so does mold growth. The further below dew point the surface temperature falls, the more condensation would occur on that surface. That's why lots of water condenses on the outside of a glass of ice water. The glass is very cold and is usually far below dew point. To summarize all this, the higher dew point rises, the more water vapor there is in the air, and the easier it is for it to condense on surfaces. ASHRAE intended the 60 threshold to be a reasonable compromise between energy use and building dryness. Here's a really important aside though. ASHRAE gives the minimum standards. So other sources believe that, for example, 55 degrees is a better threshold for dew point than 60. Also, these are upper limits, not good averages. Your home's average dew point should definitely not be around 60. Okay, so at this point you might be thinking, so I guess I'm probably okay as long as the surfaces in my home don't get too cold. Not so fast. Condensation is not the only way that surfaces can become moist. Sorption is another. Sorption is comprised of two phenomena: adsorption and absorption. Here's a quote from the article entitled "Can You Get Condensation on a Sponge?" by Dr. Allison Bales. Adsorption, briefly, refers to water that's close to and bonded strongly to a surface. When a material pulls in so much water that some of the water molecules are in the pores but not bonded strongly to the surface, those molecules are absorbed. These two phenomena together are referred to as sorption. In other words, for our purposes, sorption is basically when water settles on a surface and sinks into it. To illustrate this, here's a sorption isotherm graph from the doctoral dissertation of Professor Chris Tomusk. You can see the moisture content of some materials on the y-axis and RH on the x-axis. As you can see, the higher the RH of the surrounding air, the more water materials collect. The important part is that even if the material's temperature is higher than the dew point of the air, it can still collect Water. That's why there isn't just a mold risk when you cool a home and surfaces drop below dew point. And by the way, mold growth isn't the only issue with elevated humidity. According to numerous studies, VOC concentrations also increase with humidity. VOCs are of course linked to numerous health issues. Alright, so now you know why dehumidifying is important, but how do you determine whether you need to dehumidify in the first place? Well, first you need a way of measuring the humidity in your home. To do that, you need a hygrometer. I linked one in the description that measures temperature and RH in 4 different locations of your choosing. I've been using it for a long time and it works well, but it only gives you temperature and RH, so you have to use an app to figure out the dew point. But don't worry, it's super easy, I'll show you how. I use the Santa Fe Psychrometric Calculator app. Press the I to select the temperature scale and moisture measurement that you want to use. I use Fahrenheit and dew point. Press the dew point heading to gray it out and make it dependent on changes to temperature and RH. Now when you manually input temperature or RH, it gives you the resulting dew point. So now you can measure how humid it is in your house, but how do you know when to dehumidify? Well, if the indoor dew point temperature gets above 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you should then dehumidify. At this point, you might be asking, when might that happen? What influences indoor dew point? And of course, the major factor is outdoor dew point. When outdoor dew point temperature is above 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, indoor dew point rises as well. My favorite app that shows you a map of dew points in your area is Zoom Earth. This app is awesome. So now in terms of the seasons in which you should dehumidify, generally if it's below around 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit outside, you won't need to use a dehumidifier. And this time I'm talking about the air temperature, not the dew point. When it starts to creep above 55 to 60 outside, start using your psychrometric calculator. So I live in northern Vermont, US, and my dehumidifier runs during the late spring, summer, and early fall. I personally try to keep my home's dew point below 60 degrees. I prefer it below 50 though. So keep in mind that indoor dew point can sometimes rise higher than outdoor dew point from cooking and showering. So now let's talk about what kind of dehumidifier you might need. For our purposes here, there are 2 basic types: compressor, aka refrigerant, and desiccant. In a space that's around 70 degrees, they work pretty similarly. At 70 or above, compressors perform better though. So if it ever gets warm in your space, you should use a compressor. Later in this video, I'll show you step by step how to set up a high quality compressor dehumidifier. Below 70 degrees, in a space like a cool basement, desiccants tend to perform better. Before I show you this DIY setup method, I'm going to talk about what situations I intended this method for. It is for homes without ducted HVAC systems. Before you proclaim, who doesn't have a ducted HVAC system? I'll tell you, me and a large percentage of the US, according to a residential energy consumption survey by the US Energy Information Administration. Figure 2 shows that only 30% of homes built before 1940 have central AC, which is basically a ducted cooling system, typically also used for heating. Ducted systems become more prevalent in newer homes, but still, only 56% of homes built in the 1960s have ducted systems. Then we increased to 70% in the 1980s and 89% in the 2000s. So the older your home is, the less of a chance it has a ducted system. Here's another survey by the EIA released in 2023. This table shows AC equipment usage in US homes by state. As you can see here, 67% of US homes report using central AC, which is a ducted cooling system. That's far from every home. Here's the kicker though, that percentage varies greatly by state. For instance, in Massachusetts, where I lived most of my life, only 32% of homes use central AC. In Vermont, where I live now, a measly 7% use central AC. And it's not like we don't need AC in Vermont. It can get quite hot and humid here in the summer. 60% of Vermont homes do use individual AC units, which are defined as like mini splits, window AC units, etc. We just don't tend to have ducts here. This may blow some of your minds, but I have never lived in a home with a ducted HVAC system. So my point is, there are a lot of us without ducted HVAC systems. And it's not like retrofitting one into a home built without one is a good option, by the way. I mean, it can be done, but it can cost $40,000 to $50,000 or more, and it's a very invasive and difficult project. So this DIY installation method applies to millions of people and is sorely needed. Also, I know a lot of my viewers are from outside of the US, and I'm sure many of you don't have ducts either. Let me know in the comments if you don't. Actually, yeah, please, if everybody could comment whether your home has a ducted system or not, that would be really informative. Anyway, this method is also for those who can't make significant alterations to their homes. Maybe you're a tenant renting an apartment like me. Maybe you can't afford a professional installation. Maybe you just want a method that's easy, cheap, and fast. A caveat though, there are of course limitations to this method, which I'll discuss towards the end of the video. Now I'll talk about how to find a suitable location for a dehumidifier to be used for your living space. Here are some tips, take them or leave them. 1. Compressor dehumidifiers are loud, so be wary of putting one right in the middle of a space where like a lot of conversations are had. A good location is kind of tucked away in a little nook of your house to block the sound, but still somewhat central while leaving at least a foot of empty space near the intake of the dehumidifier and at least 2 feet near its exhaust for proper airflow. 2. Consider putting one in or near a kitchen because a lot of moisture is generated during the cooking process, sometimes enough to raise RH up to 5%, I've noticed. Now I'm going to teach you how to set up a Santa Fe Compact70. This dehumidifier was my savior this past summer, especially because I'm recovering from mold illness. The Compact70 is not cheap at around $1,300 USD, but what's so special about it is it has a MERV 13 filter to prevent mold from growing inside of it and ruining your indoor air quality. Before you start Googling cheaper alternatives, I'm sorry to report that I have not seen a cheaper dehumidifier that filters properly. I do try to find you guys budget options on this channel, but I will never recommend sacrificing your air quality to save money. If you genuinely can't afford it, my heart goes out to you. I'm not really speaking to you, but if you can afford it, I'm sorry to say that being cheap with things that affect your health, like air quality and food, will unfortunately cost you in the long run. Anyway, the Compact70 is small, but powerful. It technically is made for basements up to 1,800 to 2,200 square feet and removes up to 70 pints of water per day, which is way more than those little cheap dehumidifiers can do. I'm using it for my 1,489 square foot, 2-floor condo. Now I'll show you step by step how to set it up. Find a space that gives your dehumidifier a foot of clearance at the intake and 2 feet at the exhaust. The second thing you need to do is elevate it off the ground, and the reason why will become apparent as I go. To do that, first you'll need to screw these metal legs in. There's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they screw into these holes right up here. So you see these holes? I'm being really clear. Sorry if this is a little obvious. And once all the metal legs are screwed in, then you're going to put them on these risers. These are 6-inch risers, and the reason for them will also become apparent as we go. After you've situated it on risers, what you're going to do then is level it. And the way that you're going to accomplish leveling it is you're going to be tightening or loosening these legs. So depending on which way you screw them, they can become shorter or longer. Leveling your dehumidifier is extremely important, so do not skip this step, because if you do, you could have water pooling in the bottom of your machine and leaking out of here instead of draining into the pump, which I'll show you how to set up later. The manufacturer recommends that your machine be completely level, and I agree it should be level, but with an ever so slight bias towards the back left of your machine where it drains out of. One thing is you want to have it sloping down this way towards the back of the machine where the drain is. And then also slightly left, right? So down and to the left to have water pool and drain out of here. I want to be very clear. What you don't want to do is give it a very obvious slope down and to the left. You want to give it an ever so slight bias. So you want it to be level, but with the smallest bias down and to the left. Next, what you should do is screw in this drain nozzle, and you can use a vice grip to do so. Next thing you're going to do is orient the condensate pump correctly, and this is at the back of the machine with the filter. Here's the orientation that I like, which is a little different from the manual. Here's the drain. Here's the electrical outlet coming out of the left side. Here's the larger hole on the left. Here's the smaller hole on the right, and here's the nozzle. Here's the drainage tube that comes with the condensate pump. So what we're going to do is fix it to the nozzle of the pump. So we put it over this nozzle here, and we push it down as far as we can go. So now we're going to use this piece that comes with the condensate pump to fix the tube to the nozzle tightly. So we're going to open it up and slip it around the tube and squeeze it shut as tight as we can get it. And you can see here where I have it fastened. Next, I'll show you where the drainage tube takes the water that the dehumidifier generates. So following the tube. So this tube goes out my window and into the garden. And you can see here that I blocked my window with a corrugated plastic insert. You can get corrugated plastic at any department store. And I sized it to my window and cut it with a utility knife. And also with a utility knife, I cut out a little square for the drainage tube to go through, and then sealed up and down the insert with weather stripping tape. Next, we're going to cut a drainage tube for the dehumidifier itself. And I think the perfect length for this application is 10 inches. And you want the end of the tube that goes into the pump to be cut on an angle. So this end right here will go into this larger hole. See how it's angled like this? And here I'm using, I think, what's called a lopper to cut the drainage tube on an angle. And there you go. See that? And the other end of the tube should be more straight. That's the end that's going to go against the dehumidifier nozzle itself, like this. And you're going to push it all the way in. And again, the angled end is going to go in this hole. And the reason for that is to prevent water from flowing back up the tube. So there you have it. When you have your condensate pump all set up and plugged in, definitely don't forget that, we're going to test it with some water. So let's pour some water into this hole right here. And make sure you have that drainage tube set up so the condensate pump pumps water where you want water to be, right? Not onto your floor. And there we go. That's the sound we want to hear. We want to see water rushing through the tube. And let's follow it to where the water goes. So it goes, as I said, out that window. And let's go see if it's working properly. So here's the tube. And yep, water's coming out of it. When you dry everything off after your test, make sure no water is leaking out from around the nozzle. I think it's important to put your tube at least a few feet from the foundation of your house. What you don't want to do is have your tube here, perpetually wetting the foundation of your house. To change the filters, take the pre-filter out by pulling this tab. And take the MERV 13 filter out by pulling this tab. To put the filter back in, have the airflow arrow pointing into the machine, and then just place it right in. To put the pre-filter back in, follow the tabs, this side faces out, and then just pop it back in. And of course, when you're done with every step, plug the dehumidifier in. Whenever you run this, make sure the dehumidifier and the condensate pump are both plugged in. When it's done, this is what it should look like. So return air gets sucked in the back here, where the pre-filter is, and gets dehumidified and then blown out of here, that way. Let me show you how the controls of this dehumidifier work. This is the dial that determines what humidity level your compressor kicks on at. So if you want your air to be more humid, you can set the dial here, more normal here, and drier here. And if I turn my dial closer to drier, then it might kick on. And there we have it. If you want the fan to always be on for air circulation, then you just flip this switch to fan on. If you want the fan to only run when the dehumidifier is dehumidifying, then you flip the switch down. So this is where my dehumidifier is set up, and it's out of commission right now because it's winter. But it's kind of tucked away right near the kitchen where a lot of moisture is generated from cooking. It blows dry air into this first floor here. To help circulate the dry air to the second floor, this large fan is situated here, blowing directly up to the second floor. The dry air that this fan blows travels along this wall through the Coanda effect and is picked up by the back of this fan, which blows into my office. And then we have this fan right here blowing into the master bedroom. So the idea is basically to have a string of fans that's all kind of connected. And now I'll talk about some limitations of this kind of spot dehumidifier setup. In larger homes specifically, it might be more difficult to dehumidify rooms that are far away from where you set up the dehumidifier. Air circulation fans definitely help with that, but they might not be enough in every situation. Santa Fe does make more powerful dehumidifiers than the Compact70, so if you have a space much larger than my condo, look into those. If you could afford it, you could also use 2 dehumidifiers at once if necessary. On especially humid days where the outdoor dew point is closer to 70 or so, it's difficult to keep my indoor dew point below 60. Part of the issue is that my condo is fairly leaky, so that makes dehumidifying harder. If it were tighter, it'd be actually much easier. Here's a tip though. To help dehumidify on the most hot and humid days, I use the window AC in tandem with the Santa Fe, which obviously also serves the function of lowering the temperature. The last thing I'll mention is that dehumidifiers will raise your indoor temperature several degrees if you don't use AC. Although, listen to this, my home surprisingly still felt cooler to me when dehumidifying, even if it was a little hotter, because it was less humid. Like, it could be 80 degrees in my home and like 45% relative humidity, and I was like, it's somewhat comfortable, pretty comfortable. Of course, 80 degrees is like oppressive if it's humid in your house. Anyway, although this system has its flaws, it's the best solution I can think of for people in my situation. I know you learned something from this video if you've watched to this point, so please like it and subscribe for more content like this. Please ask me any questions in the comments. I do love hearing from you guys. I respond to pretty much every comment, as you can see. If you're also able to donate to my channel, please do so at the link at the bottom of the description. And anyway, my fellow renegades, I salute you.